Welcome, everyone. It's an honor to have you back. And we are at What's Up, Doc session number 8 today. And number 7, we discussed the soil briefly. We discussed how we got where we are within the crisis of our soil. Some of the historical context John beautifully outlined for us and within the agricultural realm. Talk briefly about regenerative agriculture, some of the system changes, and some of the implementations that could likely lead to some solutions. We didn't really touch on a lot of science necessarily, but we're setting the stage for a follow-up session on soil. So this is what that is, a follow-up session on soil. But if we just take a moment and we look at something in our life, our relationship to our reality. We take a look inside ourselves. We start thinking, what is life? How do we relate to life? How is life expressed? What isn't life? Isn't everything life? Even going into our guts and our microbiome and the relationship with the physiology between the gut brain, the importance of maintaining that environment, the macro. And I ask you to take a look at your reality and to peel away the layers and ask yourself a very simple question. What doesn't soil have a relationship to? Think about your home, as John suggested. What is it built on? What do you walk on? What do you ground with? What do you feed yourself with? How do you heal yourself? How do you breathe? How is oxygen produced? And when we say soil, what does that word really even mean? What do you visualize when you close your eyes and I say the word soil? What image comes up? We've talked about how words sometimes cannot relay the whole significance of existence or perception or reality, such as dog. See a dog, we see this image of a dog, some of us in our minds. It fails to relay that majestic, unconditional loving creature that's in front of you. So you close your eyes, you say soil. We have this hubbub, this movement to save the soil. We have these worries at a societal level, whether we can feed ourselves, or whether there's a food shortage, or there's no nutrients in our food any longer. And these things are coming up. But what isn't related to soil? What about giving your mom a loving hug? Is that related to soil? What about seeing the divine in another human being? Can that have something to do with soil? What about the abundance you've been given up to this point? In every waking state, all the food and nutrients you've consumed throughout your whole life. What about being able to go out into nature when you've had a stressful day? And to commune, to lay on the earth, to walk, to stare, to connect. How many times have you walked on the earth? How many steps have you taken without soil being underneath? So we start to understand, as Alan Watts once said, just like an apple tree apples, earth peoples. So in essence, we are from the origin of the soil. There is no difference between cosmic, galactic, and earthly. The soil is all the above. If we can remove compartmentalization, And take kind of a spaceship eye view, maybe an astronaut eye view for an hour or so. We're going to go ahead and move forward with this. John has just had, I'll let him introduce himself. Obviously, he's right here. And he's had an interesting week. Welcome, John.
Well, glad to be here.
You had another interesting week, I hear.
Yes.
So on that introduction, that very broad introduction, is there anything you'd like to add about soil and our relationship?
Well, you mentioned closing your eyes and thinking about soil and what comes to mind. And the immediate image that appeared for me, I didn't really quite understand it right away, but it was probably best described as a pyramid.
Okay.
And we're somewhere up in the pyramid, near the point, near the top of the pyramid. But of course, everything above some point of the pyramid is supported by what's below it. And it means that I, as a person, depend on everything that's below, wherever humans fall in this pyramid of life and non-life, of reality. But what's at the base of the reality is the microbiome, the soil microbiome, and how that microbiome base supports the entire higher development. We tend to think of the pinnacle part of a pyramid, the peak at the top, as being what we're concentrating on a lot. But to me, it's the base. The base is the essence of it. The rest of it doesn't exist without the base. Without the base, there is no pyramid. And the base are all of these myriad trillions, quadrillions, quintillions of microorganisms, single cells, multiple cells, but just endless of them. And all of those, in the case of this pyramid, all of those organisms that are above this space, multicellular organisms like us, and like insects, and like birds, and like dogs. We talked a lot about it, a dog. Dogs and elephants and whales and whatever. They're all dependent on those microorganisms. And all of those microorganisms, all the way through the system, are basically housed primarily in two places, and that is in the water or on the land, one or the other. And those tiny organisms are everywhere that life exists. And for us, far up in this pyramid, the soil is very clearly close to the base for us. These organisms, of course, exist within the gut of everything from a 2 or 3 cellular organism all the way up to a trillion or 10 trillion or 100 trillion cellular organism, like us. And so these things permeate everywhere. They are in every living thing. Virtually every living thing has to deal with and depend on these tiny microorganisms. And the cell is such a place. The cell I mean, the soil is such a place. I mean, it's where all of the land life forms rely on the soil in one way or another. Even the ones that don't rarely even land on it, for example, are still totally dependent on it because they land on something that depends on it. So the whole system depends, the whole terrestrial system depends on the soil as its base. It's the base of the pyramid of the terrestrial system. And so it's really our life. And I think that this is an ancient concept. I think we probably lost it in this modern science era. We've lost this understanding that the soil is life for us. Without the soil, we don't live. I mean, if you go back to biblical times, Old Testament biblical times, and you look in Genesis, and it's interesting that Adam and Eve, if you translate it into English, based on the roots for those words, and the roots for our English words, Adam and Eve really refers to soil and life.
Soil and life.
Soil and life. Adam and Eve is soil and life.
Ah, interesting.
So right away, when humans come into this picture in these ancient scriptures, soil's right there. It's the beginning. And so ancient civilizations appreciated the soil. They didn't always treat it well. Generally, cultures often, how would you put it, when people were hunter-gatherers, the soil, they never spent enough time on the soil to disrupt its natural processes irreparably. They kept moving around. And so the soil fared very well in the hunter-gatherer periods. But once we went to settling down in one place in agriculture, like what, 10,000 years ago, of that order, we started to treat the soil more like something to use than something to recognize as being as sacred as our life is. I mean, all life is sacred. And so civilizations abused it when they got under stress. And the abuse simply accelerated their demise. So countless cultures have disappeared because of what they did to soil. And we're on the same trajectory. You would think that we would, with all that history and all of our understanding of what previous cultures did to soil, many of the problems that they generated with their practices, we're generating the same ones, destroying the structure of the soil, letting salt accumulate in semi-arid regions where you irrigate with water that has more ions in it, salts and such in it, and they accumulate in the soil until you disperse the soil and it no longer will grow food. And we've done that. Modern agriculture has done that. So our sense of the soil is more like a commodity, more like something to use and abuse or whatever. Not to really think very much about what we're doing. Just like we walk over it, we build our roads on it, we build our houses on it, as you mentioned, and we dig it up. We virtually destroy it by removing it entirely so we can get at what's underneath it. And pile it up someplace and then spread it back out and hope that it will recover. And surprisingly, it often does. It often does require if you recover, if you give it a chance to recover, depending on how you treat it. So to me, the soil is really our life. And for some reason, in the modern science world, there's not a lot of consideration of the natural processes. It seems that one of the prevailing paradigms within the modern science community is that the soil is there to use. And we use it and discard it when we don't want to use it anymore. And that's not a sustainable strategy. I mean, so at some point we're going to be doing the equivalent of what the Indians called eating the seed corn. Because when the Indians ate the seed corn, they knew they were doomed because they wouldn't have any seeds to plant for the next year. And so
Interesting.
that's the stage we're approaching now. And humans have this tendency to, when they get into trouble, of doing more of what got them in trouble in the first place. You just double down and work harder at it.
Are we seeing that now at all, John?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing now. All right, our industrial agricultural practices are destroying our soils and have depleted at least half to 2/3 of the productivity potential of the soil, and maybe more, depending on how you assess it, maybe more than that. And we're going at it at an accelerating pace, and we're contaminating our water and air and all of these things. They're not good practices. They're not sustainable. And to show you how thoughtful our culture is that those who are destroying the soil the fastest, the government subsidizes. And those who are trying to regenerate the soil not only get no subsidies, some of them, especially in the organic movement, have to pay in order to be a certified organic. You have to pay the government.
Yeah, I remember you saying that before in our last session.
Yeah, so this is not a very enlightened approach to the soil and to the organisms. I like the pyramid analogy. I never thought of it before you had us just close our eyes for a little bit at the beginning and see what we saw in our mind's eye. But this pyramid concept is a useful one because, I mean, imagine all of these myriad microorganisms at the base that can just live on their own. They can live in the ocean, they can live in the soil. They don't have to be inside of a higher organism like us, but they are. So if you think about this pyramid and what's the common thread that holds this entire pyramid together? In other words, every higher animal, from a 2 or 3 cell animal or plant organism, all the way up to us with our 10 trillion or however many cells we have, and then another 20 or 30 trillion microorganisms in us. Every organism all the way through this pyramid has these microorganisms in it. Think about the level of organization to reality when you think about it this way. The threads that hold all the pieces of this pyramid together are the microbial threads.
Okay.
And they just run through every organism as you move up the pyramid. And, each higher organism that's bigger tends to consume the ones that are smaller. And as you consume an organism that had some microorganisms in it, then those microorganisms become part of you. And so they're working their way all the way through this pyramid of organisms.
Mhm.
And when you think about us eating at the top of this pyramid, we can eat just about anything that's lives and grows in this earthly environment. So we can pick from the top of the pyramid, or we can pick from the bottom of the pyramid. But it doesn't matter where we go when we consume it, we're also going to be consuming these microorganisms, which are sustaining every form of life. And it all starts at the soil for the terrestrial ecosystem. So the soil is literally our mother. I mean, we talk about Mother Earth. The soil is the mother of life. It's the essence of our existence.
Okay,
yet-
that's some pretty profound summaries there, John. So I was just gonna let the audience, contemplate that soil is the mother of life,
Of terrestrial life.
and it's also the essence of existence.
Yeah.
And
I mean, you can imagine that this organizing this whole thing to try to keep it all balanced.
yeah, so
It's pretty amazing.
from a conceptual perspective, I want to interrupt, but I also want to interject to get some good questions here and go back, banter back and forth, keep it exciting, right? But when we're looking at something wrong with the soil, right, at the base of the pyramid, and we're on the top of the pyramid,
Right.
not only does it seem to take time to get to us, right, but it appears that, or it doesn't, depending on how you look at it. But what degree of deficiency do you think the average human person is suffering from at a microbial level at this point?
Wow.
I mean, is conceptually, we don't have to get into statistics.
Well, I can take myself as an example.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah, if we just do
because-
examples, just a question, just to contemplate.
Yeah, I've worked pretty hard to try to overcome my deficiencies by just eating like a normal American. Right, the standard American diet, the SAD diet, SAD, standard American diet. That's much the way I ate until perhaps, well, I started eating organic in about 2006. So if I count that, it would be since 2006. But I didn't really start dealing with the chemistry, the biochemistry in my body until about 2015. So somewhere between 7 and 15 years, I've started to get a little more concerned, and seriously in the last 7 years.
Okay.
And when I went to a special practitioner who I learned about from my daughter.
Yes, very gifted one in Austin, Texas. What is his name?
His name is Ryan.
Ryan, okay.
And Ryan really, he gave me insights. And one of the first things he did was he looked at my genetics to see what predispositions I have. And I have plenty of them. Okay, yeah. So there's, if I stuck strictly to eat according to my genetics, there would not be many foods I could eat at all. So I have to just eat some of these foods in moderation because my body doesn't deal with them like most people's bodies do.
So you're saying, just to boil it down just for a connection, that there is a connection between genetics and the microbiome that we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. I mean, because my genetics are interfacing with the microbiome in my gut and other places in my body. And so the second thing he did was he had me get a really exhaustive bank of lab tests. And in that process, I found out about my gluten sensitivity. I found out I was deficient in all of the B vitamins. I was deficient in zinc and copper and magnesium and potassium. I mean, I had this huge array of deficiencies. And looking at me from the outside, you would have said I'm a pretty healthy person. But I was on a trajectory toward a not very healthy older age. And so we started to supplement. And that's about the time that I learned that most of the food that I eat, that you can look up the nutrient content in tables. Some of them are old tables, 20, 30, 40 years old. And the nutrients in the foods we eat today that are raised in industrial agriculture are depleted. Those nutrients are no longer available in the soil. Many of them are in the soil. They're just not available for the plants to get them anymore.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yeah, and it's because of what we've done to that soil. We have changed that soil so that it's evolving with us.
Mm.
And some of the nutrients that we used to get adequate supply of in the foods that we ate when it was grown maybe 50 years ago, 50, 75 years ago, some of those nutrients have been depleted in those foods, not the soil itself, but in the foods, anywhere from 25 to 75%, depending on the nutrient.
Since when are we talking here?
I had a,
So over, is this a period of time when they're actually showing a decrease in nutrients? Is they're spanning like 100 years?
yeah, it's certainly 100 years. It's probably accelerated in the last 50.
It's kind of like an
Right.
exponential decay.
It's decreasing faster and faster. I mean, it's some of them can get so low that the plants don't grow, and then they don't change anymore because either the plant has its minimum amount or it doesn't exist. It's not available to us. And so it's getting enough minerals and vitamins and various cations, the calcium, potassium, magnesium, zinc, copper, I mean, boron, I mean, all of these essential nutrients, for me to get enough of them, at least half of them, I had to supplement in order to get the lab tests up. So I consider myself pretty much average. And so
just an average guy, John. Just an average
guy. And I had to change my eating radically, and I had to start to supplement seriously. I mean, I was taking 20 supplements a day.
And this is, is this attributed to the deficiency in the micronutrients in the soil and the microbiome from the base of the pyramid? Are you able to trace it back?
It's a serious part of it. Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a serious part of it. All of it? No, because some of it would come from my choice of foods. And I had to get some more education on how to get more of some of the nutrients I could get if I changed what I ate. And so I eat routinely now foods that I never ate before. Radishes, I mean, I eat them raw. I eat broccoli raw. I mean, the beets. I hated beets. Oh, I just as a kid, I hated beets. Cauliflower, I never ate cauliflower.
Yeah.
Hated it as a kid. Well, once I realized I got to start eating this stuff if I want to be healthy and be around for a few more years. And so I found that if I ate it long enough, even though I didn't like it, if I ate it long enough, I'd get to like it. My taste would change according to what I ate. It took a few months, or maybe up to 6 months before I would like some of this stuff, but all of it I like now.
So I have just a quick question, random off the side that came up. If we educated the populace needs to know, we prioritize eating healthy, right? Let's just say that by nutrient content specifically, and not having empty calories, but nutrient content without empty calories. And we built that relationship on education and understanding and nutrition, as we've been talking about. Would it be a good necessary precursor to the prioritization of the soil if we were able to do that? So if we prioritize,
there's people trying to do that today.
How's that going? Yeah.
Well, they're trying to do it with the nutrient content of the fruits and vegetables and meats that those plants have now. Those fruits and the yield of those plants have now. And it's just not possible to do because the body needs both calories and nutrients.
Yeah.
I mean, in a simple-minded way. I'm not a nutritionist, so I think about this in a simple-minded way. And it needs a balance of the two. You need enough calories in there, either as fats and ketones or as carbohydrates and glucose. It needs a certain amount of that for the energy supply that's going to run all of your internal processes that go on in your body, mirrored processes in your body, and of course your movement and your exercise and all of that. But you need nutrients to go along with that because some of the nutrients get wasted away. All right, some of the nutrients leave your body by waste pathways. All right, so you have to keep renewing those ones that are depleted from your body as you function and do all the things you do. And the problem we have now in the SAD diet is we have too much energy and not enough nutrients.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we're calorie heavy and nutrient light.
Yeah, the nutrients are the problem that we really face now. So if you eat more, and what you're eating are foods high in carbohydrates, say, for example, like sugars, then you'll never have a nutrient balance because you will always be short of nutrients because the balance of the carbohydrate nutrients of the food that you're eating isn't suitable for the body. So what happens is you eat more and more and more because you're always hungry. Well, you're always hungry because you never get enough nutrients. And then you have obesity as a problem. And then obesity leads to diabetes. And it's just a downhill slide from that. And a lot of that starts with the soil, but it gets amplified and magnified by our cultural patterns. I used to enjoy a soda once in a while, maybe a few a week, or we go out to dinner or something in a restaurant and I'd have a soda. Well, I can't imagine consuming a soda now. I haven't had a soda for years.
Don't shame our audience, John. Don't shame our audience.
Well, there's no way I'm gonna get a can of soda and consume it. It's disaster. It really is disastrous. It's got no nutrient value to matter. And it's got a whopping pile of carbohydrates in it. I mean, one soda and you consume 10 or 15% of the total carbohydrates a person should consume in a day. And some people have 2 or 3 of these in a day. And it's crazy. I mean, I had to radically change my eating in order to get my nutrient balance, calorie balance worked out, so that I could be reasonably healthy.
That's really interesting about nutrients decreasing hunger, people not getting nutrients, being hungry all the time, leading to obesity, and you kind of have this addiction cycle. You know, we talked about addiction, the cycles of addiction of getting the high intake to withdrawal to craving, and then it spirals into, you know, out of control. So this is no shortage. This is no shortage than an actual addiction cycle that's fueling something because something's not being met. Just like with an addiction, your wholeness isn't being met at a fundamental level. Your bliss and euphoria, it's being elucidated by the drugs, not being accessed at its most whole, in this most whole and organic way. Apologize for stuttering. And we're seeing the same thing with nutrients. So they're never really getting what they need. There's an insatiable hunger. And you think that, I'm not going to say that all of it. Well, again, you have dopamine, you have the reward systems, you have the 11 other hormones and neurotransmitters involved in eating that facilitate a reward and a reinforcement. But suffice to say that nutrients are a specific part of that. It could at least curb it in a significant way and increase health if we increase nutrients, decrease hunger.
And you can supplement with a lot of nutrients. I mean, B vitamins are really tricky because B vitamins are water soluble, and so they go through your system pretty fast. And if you're going to supplement with B vitamins, you have to find a way to get them into your system. And the best way is under your tongue or on your skin. And you got to do it multiple times a day because they disappear from your system. They're water soluble. So B vitamins are not easy to get. And some of these, like B12, some of those supplements, they're supplementing with 20, 30 times the daily dose that you need because only a small fraction of it ever gets absorbed in your system before it gets flushed out. So some of these things are hard to supplement with, and they're better to be supplemented in the food that you eat. But the food that you eat can be deficient in the B vitamins as well, depending on the conditions for growth, the soil it was grown in. I mean, all kinds of factors here. And I'm not a nutritionist. I don't know very much about nutrition. I do know that I'm way healthier now than I was 5 years ago. I have more energy now than I did 10 years ago. And I'm stronger, and I have a lot better health now than I did before. For the last 3 years, I've been eating ketogenically. I mean, and intermittent fasting, which is every day fasting for 16 hours and eating in an 8-hour window. And that's transformed my energy levels and how my digestion works. And a lot of what we're talking about here is majorly influenced by the soil and the growing practices that represent the source of our food.
So we're back to the relationship with soil. The soil, the mother of terrestrial life, the essence of existence, as well as the base of the pyramid, the microbiome base that supports the entire higher development of life.
Yeah, it does. And we need it, and we're losing it. Meat is another interesting example. I mean, a lot of people don't eat meat. I used to eat a lot of meat. It's probably the only thing that kept me alive because I didn't eat very many vegetables, except the high carbohydrate vegetables like potatoes.
But we know,
I think I eat meat now. was pretty much mostly a vegetarian for a number of years, and that didn't work very well for me. And so what I found now is that I eat moderate amounts of meat with a lot of variety, and I eat only pasture raised meat. So
Mm.
that that's expensive, as you might guess, much more expensive than feedlot meat, but it has a lot fewer toxins in it because the animals absorb the toxins from things they're given,
And it's
feed they're
condensed.
given, and the muck that they're in. I mean, these
Yeah.
feedlot animals. When I was visiting in Vermont last week, I learned from a farmer that when they were doing feedlot work, which they were before they went to the pasture raised, they had to always have a person around regularly who would uh, trim the hoofs of the animals because they were standing in such muck, their hoofs would decay and rot, and they were constantly having to patch them up. And animals are dying every day, and they're burying them. That's you just can't imagine how horrific that scene is, of, of treating these animals as though they're billiard balls on a pool table. I mean, it's I just can't eat that. It's all I can in a clear conscience support that.
Some would say humans are a battery as well that can be fed upon. So to look at one animal is lower than another animal, it's just an error, an intellectual perspective.
It is for me.
Yeah.
It is for me, and it gets hard for me sometimes when the kitchen gets overrun by ants. I I have to be creative in how I deal with that because I can't just hire the exterminator to come out and spray the house with some toxin that I'm going to inhale for the next 3 months. And
I had
so
that issue, and I got an all
it's
natural company. There's some all natural alternatives, but
yeah, but
there's,
well, the natural ones can be just as damaging to
I
your
know,
lungs and your body as
I
the
know.
synthetic ones.
I tell myself
Um,
that.
but
So see denial,
yeah,
even the audience sees denial.
so, well, when you value all of the life, it gets more complicated to deal with some of the pest problems,
It
and
does.
that's part of the challenge with life is you have to find ways that you can put barricades up between their normal world and my normal world so that we don't overlap more than a little bit. And
So
that's
yeah.
possible, but it's a lot more expensive than hiring the pest expert to come in and spray some toxin in your house.
So yeah, so the relationship to soil goes all the way to pest control. That's what we're finding out.
Oh, it
Yeah.
certainly does. And a lot of the foods that we eat now are laced with toxins.
Yeah.
And it's a major energy consumption in my body, I know, is detoxifying my body because I know that I have titanium accumulated in my cells and I have mercury. I had a bunch of amalgam fillings, and I didn't really realize the consequences of that till I got with this practitioner in Texas. And I took some hair samples, if you can believe. I
Oh,
actually
how did that
got some.
happen?
Well, I had to let my hair grow for about 4 months to
Oh
have
boy.
enough hair. And they needed what they called a very small hair sample. And I just about had to shave my head to get a hair sample. Okay. That was big enough for them to assess the toxins. They get the toxins in
Uh,
your body by analyzing your hair.
yeah.
And it sent it off in mercury and titanium. Well, the mercury came from the amalgam fillings in my mouth. I had a mouthful of amalgam fillings, and that's toxic. that's, boy, that is toxic. I went to a special dentist called a mercury-free dentist, although they don't advertise that because it's not popular with their profession to badmouth amalgam fillings because they're so convenient for the dentist to use. But they went through a whole special procedure to remove the amalgam fillings and keep my system from getting a huge dose of mercury in the process. Because half of the amalgam filling is mercury,
Yeah.
elemental mercury, which is a horrendous toxin for us, neurotoxin. I mean, it damages our neurological system.
So it's fluoride,
Well, yeah, and so I had high mercury, and the titanium came because I had a tooth repaired, and they put a pin in the tooth so that it wouldn't break off, and that pin was titanium, but it didn't go straight down into the root.
Yeah.
It went in at an angle, and below the gum, it came out into the tissue, and so there was titanium directly in contact with my bloodstream. So
And
it
so if we can reel
picked up a
back,
bunch of titanium.
yeah, so we're dealing with detox levels here, the relationship to soil as well. We're dealing with environmental factors, a relationship to environmental factors. And if we could scale back and take like we had suggested, maybe a spaceship or a galactic or cosmonaut perspective on a relationship to soil, I gotta tap in on a spiritual scientific thread a little bit here for the audience.
Well, the strategy we're using in dealing with this soil is one of overpowering it to get what we want now. And so if it's something we want, we support it, we feed it. If it's something we don't want, we kill it. This is, to me, this is not a spiritual approach to dealing with the world around us and all the other organisms that we depend on. To me, this is a blind, selfish, very selfish approach to living in community with myriad other organisms in the system. This is the height of selfishness. And we don't have to do this. That's what's so frustrating for me is we don't need to do this. We don't need to function this way. This is an economic motivation. This is not a motivation that has an organic origin, right? And so we can be much wiser about how we interact with these other organisms that we depend on, respect them more.
Yeah. So
and
the
to
respect,
me, that's a spiritual approach.
So the relationship needs respect for the microorganisms. We can say that if you don't, it's going to be your own demise. We know that, right? This is things we can know if you know anything. That seems to be pretty evident. But to respect them for their own right, I think is a really, even to bring it to the next level, not just out of self-preservation, but for what they truly are, in awe, and that you're not separate, that they're actually you, that there's that relationship where you're respecting them in a mutual environment, a mutual reality where there isn't a significant difference. We say, oh, we're higher up in the food chain, therefore what we say goes, what matters the most. And that's so illusory to how it really works, because as you're describing, without respecting the microorganisms as they are for what they are, for the amazing contribution to this reality that we call Earth, right? The matrix, Earth matrix that we experience. Without the bidirectional respect, without that mutual respect, that synergistic relationship, I think that starts with just respect for the microorganisms themselves, irrespective of your relationship with them. then that will bring in respect for yourself as well. If you respect the microorganisms as themselves, then you realize you have a relationship with these microorganisms. Then that relationship, that respect comes into the relationship to yourself. If you switch the perspectives in the relationship and how you're observing the observer observing the observed, you combine that and you condense the observer and the observed into a unity, then you'll get a neutrality where separation goes away. The egoic infrastructure of being superior and inferior, that duality goes away. And it's all the same thing. You're all part of this. Is there anything you'd like to elaborate on that?
Well, no, I think you're right. They make us up. Imagining no person would acquire a plant from the soil, plant a plant in this garden, and then cut off the tip of your finger and put it in the soil in order to take the plant out of the soil. But basically, when you put a
That's not
pesticide,
yeah.
right? When you put a pesticide on that soil and then grow your plant on that soil, it's basically what you're doing.
Cutting your finger off.
Just like cutting off your finger and burying it in the soil. All right. I mean, throwing it away, letting it rot in the soil or whatever. In fact, the soil would get more from that than it gets from the toxin you put on the soil to get the plant you got. But these toxins are a big deal. Our bodies.
We're not recommending that for those using fertilizer. Just
yeah. No, don't cut your finger off. All right, but you're that's an acute choice, right? That's an acute injury, and what you're doing to your gut is not acute; it's chronic. Right. So you're creating this chronic problem in your gut by these toxins, which are killing off selectively the microorganisms in your gut, and they're killing off selectively the microorganisms in the soil. Right? And so you not only are losing the nutrients with our soil practices, but we're destroying a bunch of the microorganisms that are capable of mobilizing those nutrients in the soil so that the plant can get them.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, the microorganisms do the same thing in our gut as they do in the soil. There's many microorganisms in our gut that are favorable for us produce nutrients that our body can't produce, but we have to have them or we die. Right? And so if we take some toxin into our body that kills off one of these bacterial strains that produces something that we need, then we're going to be sick from that. Well, and I know, for example, I haven't knowingly eaten anything that has been of a GMO origin for at least 15 years. Right? So I did a test for the pesticides that are common with GMOs, and I'm on the 50th percentile. And I haven't eaten any GMOs for 15 years. Right? In other words, they're ubiquitous. We use so much of this stuff. We all got it in our digestive system, right? And how do you restore it? This is what we're doing with our practices. Sure, we look at the soil and we think, well, we can do what we want with the soil because it's not us. Well, it actually is us. All right, because when you eat the food from the soil, it is us, right? So
I understand. Yeah.
But we're blind to the fact that this soil is an extension of us. And what we do to it, we ingest what we do to it.
Pardon the phrase, it's like,
wow,
it's like peeing in the wind, right? Don't go against the wind.
yeah, I should be a little careful with that.
Yeah, or anything like that. It's shoot yourself in the foot, any sort of more diplomatically appropriate
Well, we
example.
certainly are doing those things with what we're doing on the soil. And the endocrine disruptors, which come from
that's huge.
From the pesticide degradation properties, because the pesticide, you put them on the soil or you put them in the plant and they get into the soil and then they degrade into the organisms degrade them. And those things look like your own endocrine system, like your own hormones. And they do stuff in your body that your hormones are supposed to do, that your body controls, but your body can't control these endocrine disruptors. And all kinds of problems happen with our hormones that come from these toxins that we're consuming. So we have a really self-destructive attitude toward how we treat the soil. And if it doesn't change, we're going to keep getting sicker and sicker and sicker. Now, that might be good for a certain segment of the economy up to a point, until it gets so bad that you no longer can deal with it. And when you look at the segments of our economy that are growing and the segments of our economy that are declining, you'll see that the ones that are declining are related to our necessities, our food.
So if we could, we have some more time left. What can we do, John?
We can support regenerative agriculture.
Okay, so that's one, support regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
What else?
I think it would ideally support the regenerative agriculture, and probably we should add to that the organic movement.
Okay.
Because the organic movement is suffering now. Because many of
the policies?
Well, at least some of the certifications for organic have been watered down to the point now that you can actually have cows in CAFOs, in confined animal feeding operations, CAFO, animals that are raised 90% of the time in a CAFO and consider the milk from that animal to be organic milk. So the organic standards are slowly being eroded because of a lot of reasons. So in general, the regenerative practices are organic, but they don't have to be. You can be regenerating the soil and still using some fertilizers and maybe even some herbicides and things, especially in a transition. But I think we really need to be respecting the soil more and pressuring our food supply system to get rid of some of these toxins and practices that degrade the soil.
I'm just going to say that when I was learning about the pesticides and the different aspects of this and pathophysiology and this resurgence of particular cancers after introducing these to the market and the food supply and farmers getting sick, and it became to me very clearly that how did we allow a system to exist in which you're paying them to poison you?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Right? They're making money on, and that's maybe not always the intent, but that's what's happening when you do this. People are ingesting these things. The infrastructure obviously needs to change by prioritizing nutrients, health, and not allowing someone to profit more off of unhealthy, nutrientless food that we pay for. But you're saying it's the exact opposite in the system now, that organics has different policies that make it more difficult. Regenerative agricultural policies are making it more difficult. Is there going to be a shift in the system? Is there going to be a pendulum swing in the appropriate direction out of self-preservation? Or is money going to continue to dictate the populace as it currently does? And the power should be within the people and the consumers who are buying the food.
But that consumer community has to get activated and apply pressure to the community that's supplying the food.
How could you apply pressure? How could you apply pressure to the community controlling the food?
It's not easy to do that.
I know.
But the most effective way to do that is to become aware of what your representatives in government are doing and voting out the people who don't do that. From my perspective, this issue with food and what is happening to our soils is more important than most of the political hassles that we deal with every day in our various levels of government functioning. And yet where are the lobbies in our Congress for healthy food? I know there are some, but they're pretty invisible. I read not too long ago that the food and agriculture community and their related industries that support them have more lobbyists in Washington than the Department of Defense lobbyists.
What?
Right? Yeah, it's hard to believe that, but it's true. I mean, and if you look at how the laws are made and the way that our government system works when it comes to healthy food, it's run on the economics, and the economics contains no wisdom about how to function in the natural ecosystem. The economics is totally divorced from the natural ecosystem. And that's a poor system. So one way it is through the government, because the regulation has to happen at the government level, and it has to happen at the national level.
Yeah.
Otherwise, one state gets played off against the next one. But another level we can operate at is our food choices. And it requires us to get a little more educated on our food choices. The biggest problem now is that more and more people are shifting to organic and regenerative, particularly grass-fed meat and milk and dairy products. But there's not enough. There's not enough. Our federal subsidy system is not subsidizing those people, as far as I can tell, unless something is happening recently that I don't know about, and that's entirely possible. It's subsidizing the industrial agriculture. I mean, and we need to be supporting this regenerative community liberally now to convert as much of our system as we possibly can to something that regenerates the soil and doesn't continue to deplete it. Something that will minimize the toxins that we need to add to the soil.
Okay.
And so now we're back to the government again,
Yeah, I
because
was
the
gonna say that.
government
Yeah.
subsidies, the only reason our agriculture survives is with government subsidies. I mean, there's huge, huge government subsidies to farmers, and there has to be. I'm not critical of the subsidy system. A certain percentage of our agricultural community is going to have failed crops every year, and they're going to be moving around in different places in the country. And the section that has a failure in one particular year, you have to subsidize them, right? Because they may not have another failure like that for 10 years. And you don't want them to go out of business. We can't afford to have our farmers go out of business, all right? That's one item that we have to have, or we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. So I think that it's a mixture of things that we need to do, and certainly getting the government to address this. I don't have any crystal ball about how to do that. I
Yeah.
don't know how to do that. I just know how important it is to get going at it and start working on it. It's not too late. We haven't destroyed our soil base, but
Yeah.
we're going in that direction fast.
Yeah. Another thing that's been great to hear was the idea of having local growers that are supporting local people.
Yep.
And the local,
CSAs.
yeah. And that's what was the CSA?
CSA is what does that stand for?
It's not a co-op.
No, it's not a co-op.
Anyways.
It's farmers that grow commodities, horticultural commodities people eat for the most part.
Okay.
And then they take subscriptions from people, sign up for them, and then they deliver products to them.
Farm to table type thing.
Yeah, farm to table type of thing.
And buying that instead of going to the grocery store.
Yeah.
And choking off the supply chain to the companies that are prioritizing industrial support.
Yeah. The thing is that it's pretty nigh on impossible to.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, to not consume some of the mainstream agricultural products.
Yeah, that's a critical point.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to do that. I mean, to eat totally organic, I've tried to eat everything organic, and I can't get it. I can't get everything organic, period. It just isn't anywhere in my grocery stores or the ones within 50 miles of me. So it's you end up having to consume to some degree products from the main food system.
Yeah.
Even if you're trying to eat organic or you're trying to eat regenerative. So it's simply not possible for me, at least at this point, to do that 100%. But I can do it 75 or 80%.
Yeah, it's a start.
It's a start. It's a start, and that with supplements and I think there's more interest in the farming community to do this. The real problem is no one really knows how to deal with the economic consequences of this. We haven't yet figured out how to diversify our pesticide industry when it won't really be supported like it is in agriculture now. What do we do with that industry? We can't just unemploy umpteen million people.
Yeah.
So the issues, that's why this is going to take time. With the best of intentions, this is going to take time to adjust to this.
Yeah.
And then, large corporations don't adjust well. They have a hard time adapting to major changes in their supply chain or in their consumer chain. And so this has to be done slowly and responsibly. And I know some of the bigger food companies are working hard on trying to understand how they can interface with this regenerative community, because they know what's coming.
Yeah.
The agricultural businesses and corporations, they know what's coming. And they're trying to deal with it too. It's just really a hard problem. We've worked ourselves into a difficult corner trying, and it's going to not be easy to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, that's a really good point. Let me just, well, it's a good segue onto the summary. A few things that we can do is prioritize nutrients in your diet over calories to really up the ante on the nutrients, respect the relationship to microorganisms at a fundamental level, support your regenerative agriculture and your organic movement.
I'd say that the evidence that we have to go on now, for example, this practitioner I work with, Ryan, he works with a lot of people, and he tells me that many of the people he works with just cannot bring themselves to make the modifications in their diet that they need to make. They're just not able to make those adjustments. So
Okay.
one of the things that I
Good
think
point.
would be a really useful research endeavor
Okay.
would be for researchers to work on how to slowly transition people from where they are now
Yeah.
in this sad diet off in the direction of other diets that will give them time to adjust to the changes.
So that,
How should we sequence getting sodas out of your diet completely?
yeah,
How do you sequence that? All I know
brilliant.
is I haven't had heavy doses of sugar for at least 5 years. And I do consume a little bit, but I am still addicted to sugar. Every time I just get the smallest little piece of cookie, or the smallest piece of chocolate. I love chocolate. I really love chocolate. Dark chocolate.
I see it in your eyes. Yeah.
92% cocoa. Yeah, I really like chocolate.
That's a good point.
I still have to severely discipline myself to stop there.
So you're looking
I
at,
have never, and even though I have eaten so little of this over the
yeah,
last
I am
5
agree.
years,
I'm in agreement.
I just have not been able to diminish my craving for sugar.
And that's because it's in a little bits, and almost, if you look at where sugar is in the diet, it's everywhere. They pepper it everywhere throughout the diet. It's just a supplement at this point for the everything, and modifying the diet, being able to make the appropriate adjustments, maybe having a defined nutritional coaching platform, a healthcare nutrition platform, a transition team for dietary improvement. And we're dealing with addiction at this point again. We're dealing with addictions, dealing with habits, we're dealing with rewards and reinforcement at a very fundamental level. Some people would say they'd rather die than give up these favorite foods. I know I said it, I'd rather die than give up coffee, alcohol, or beer specifically, and meat. And you know what? I gave all three of those up. So never say never, folks. But yeah, I think it is a hard thing to change. Habits and reinforcement's a hard thing to change. So that's going to be something to address. Also prioritizing politics. In other words, putting pressure on the system and through the government, looking at subsidizing organic and regenerative over the industrial, which I think is a really important point, and to pay attention to your local, start voting people out that won't do that. We talked about local grows and permaculture community feeding locally, food choices in the actual store, and then having, again, local support, farm to table scenario there. And those are some ideas. And those are just ideas that came up today. And I would like to thank the audience for another wonderful session in your time and your consideration on these topics. Again, if there's anything that you'd like to comment or mention or suggest on future podcasts and talks that we do, we'd be happy to take those in. And where you're accessing the video and the website that should be there. And we thank you for your time, and we hope that you gain something from these conversations that we have together. And this was a special topic for John's an expert in the soil topic and the lay of the land and the climate. And this is our soil follow-up, the conclusion to our soil follow-up series here. Are there any conclusions that you would have for the audience today as well, John? I always ask you that.
Just start paying more attention to what you eat. I think most people know the things they eat they shouldn't eat.
Yes.
And start weaning yourself off of those. You can go cold turkey on some things, but other things, it's really hard. And you start it and then you fall off the wagon. So wean yourself off of these things slowly and start paying attention to what you eat. And I think one of the most important things we could do is get more complete lab tests than you normally get at your doctor or your clinic office when you get your annual physical. That's not enough information. At least every few years, you should have 50 or 75 lab tests, not 10. And that'll really open your eyes in a hurry.
It'd be nice if the healthcare system would subsidize that as well, wouldn't it, for the people?
It would be nice, but they tend to resist it. The healthcare system I'm in, which I'm still in, by the way. I go outside of that system a lot, but I also use that system as much as I can. They resist doing a real complete bank of tests. They tend to do whatever test is required to diagnose some problem. But when you want to preempt a problem and find out what kinds of deficiencies you have that are going to eventually cause problems, my clinic doesn't do a very good job of that.
Okay.
And it's hard to do. So you could try functional medicine. Functional medicine is a place where that's what they do, preventative medicine. And I would suggest people consider that. Now, it might be hard to find a functional medicine doctor, but they have a different approach. And the combination of both, this is what I've done. The combination of both a functional medicine practitioner and my medical doctor at my clinic. And I use them both. They both have strengths and they both have weaknesses. And for me, I need to use them both in order to be anywhere near healthy.
Okay. Well, I would agree with all that you said. I think those are fantastic choices. I'd also like to say, start with respecting the microorganisms for their sake and building on that relationship. And that relationship will assist in being able to make the harder decisions and shifts in your dietary changes for those who have not done it. As we know, everything is a relationship and perspective. And from my personal experience, once your perspective changes, you'll be surprised at the behavioral modification you're able to do as a result of that change in your relationship and mutual respect. And so until next time, enjoy every moment of the eternal now. Love yourself and love others as thyself. Live the life you want to live. Become whom you want to become. And know that within you, You already are who you've always wanted to be. Until then, namaste and good day, good night, and I'll catch you on the flippity flop. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.